Well, the spate of murders in the LGBTI community has once again thrown light on the prevalence of hate crimes and discrimination in the country. This week, another possible hate crime murder rocked the Northwest when the body of Kagiso Maems was discovered. His family believe he was killed because he was gay. For more, we're joined from our Pretoria studios by Steve Letsike. She's the co-chairperson of the South African National AIDS Council. Good afternoon, Steve, and welcome to the SABC News Desk.
Thank you so much, Kishni. Good afternoon, and to your viewers as well.
Steve, are we facing an epidemic of violence that's somehow less recognized, or is that being alarmist right now?
We are, in fact, and I mean, this has been an ongoing thing that has been taking place in our communities, Kishni. We have seen quite a number of hate crimes brutally that has been taking place in our country. We've seen a murder of Kagiso in Northwest. In fact, we've also seen a murder of Nokle in the Western Cape. This has been really a biggest challenge for South Africa, where we are burying LGBTI people. You know, every week, every month, there's always reporting that is taking place. We're talking about murders, and which are extremely brutal for that matter, but we're also talking about high level of discrimination and stigma in this country. So in fact, yes, one can say we are facing a real crisis in South Africa, and we need to look at strong mechanisms that are accountable but are also responding to prevention aspect, but also to the rapid response.
Steve, I hear you. The brutality and frequency of these crimes is indeed concerning. And I know it's difficult to quantify at this point, especially when there's no reliable figures on the extent of the issue. But can you tell us why you think this remains such a pervasive problem in South African society?
Look, Kishni, we have a big issue that speaks to social, structural, economic and political challenges that still face this country. We have a very long history of prejudice, whether we speak about race, we speak about gender, sex, and now even worse, we speak about prejudice around sexual orientation and gender identity for that matter. We have seen the high level of stigma and discrimination based on the fact that a lot of people would hide behind religion, would hide behind culture and what it means to be an African for that matter. Here we're talking about LGBTI persons who are not necessarily subpopulation whatsoever. LGBTI people are population of this country and have been for a very long time ignored. Yes, we have a very liberal constitution, a 23-year-old democracy and a constitution that is very strong on paper, but we seek a very strong constitution that is implemented, that speaks to the issue of education, where people understand and can unpack what it means to be LGBTI. We've got pockets of excellence that we cannot run away from in South Africa, where we've seen implementation of programs led by Justice Department, Health Department, and various LGBTI organizations. But the problem still exists because of high level of stigma and discrimination.
Steve, you just preempted two things that I wanted to mention now. There was some research done last month by the Institute of Race Relations Center for Risk Analysis, and it shows that black LGBTI people are more likely to be victims of physical violence than those in other race groups. What can we do to lessen the vulnerabilities of this group, and what are the factors that reinforce homophobia in our society overall?
Look, Kishni, I think first is that we must acknowledge the challenges faced by black community generally, and also broadly the fact that South Africa is still a very highly violent country. People still live in fear. People still fear walking down the road. We've got a very violent country that we are living in, but also to note that that we have high levels of gender-based violence and high levels of hate crimes that we're experiencing. What we know is that ignorance that South Africans have and the intolerance, the high level of intolerance also still fuels whether people are going to hide behind the religious fundamentalism or cultural perspective. It's a very big problem. But when we work with various organizations, whether from religious institutions or cultural background, we work with traditional leaders who are willing to listen and say, but then we haven't been doing things right. How do we start to unpack? How do we start to unlearn some of the behaviors that are leading us to be violent towards other people? And these are some of the things that we still are willing to do that. In fact, you are quite right. The black community are more vulnerable because of how we have also seen the level of or history of prejudice and marginalization. But it also does not dismiss that other races are not experiencing this level of violence. Again, we've got two lesbian women who are white and who are a couple, also again in Northwest. And I think in the last 2 weeks, we've seen the high level of hate crimes that were taking place in Northwest. Yes. But this is the biggest challenge. Other races are also experiencing high levels of violence.
Yes, Steve, I hear you, and we are running out of time now. Very quickly, I just want to ask, because you mentioned our strong commitment, a strong constitutional commitment to protecting gay rights. And in South Africa, I find we often have to balance this with the largely homophobic rest of Africa. What would you like to see happen in terms of hate crime laws, because we still don't have dedicated hate crime legislation in the country?
Absolutely, and we're hoping that the Department of Justice will speed that process of hate crime legislation, because it's the bias, is the motive we want to address. Secondly, we want South Africa to intensify the prevention agenda. We cannot allow the hate crimes to continue, or any gender-based violence to continue. For that matter, we want to see the structures that were put in place to be effective, functional, but also to be accountable. The third thing, Kishni, just to close, it's very crucial that we invest our time to communities where it matters. Whether it's resources, we must ensure they go to community-led interventions. That will intensify prevention. But the last one is ensuring that where justice is needed, it must serve the population, because we can't speak of justice and people are not feeling it.
Senate Co-Chair Steve Letsike joining us from our Pretoria studios. Thank you so much, Steve, for always sharing your insights with us so generously on the SABC News Desk.